What is the best and worst type of bread for your gut? There is a lot of information out there today and they contradict each other. In this video, we're gonna get all of the facts straight. I'm gonna tell you about every different type of bread, what bread is the most nutrient dense, what bread is the easiest to digest, what bread to avoid if you are having gut issues, like avoid it like the plague. I mean, there was types of bread that I started to eat when I was first starting to heal my gut, and it just destroyed my gut. I'm gonna show you how to get rid of all your gluten and bread intolerances, everything you need to know about bread in this video. I've helped many people get rid of their bread and gluten intolerance. It's actually very easy when you know the root cause. So first we need to understand what bread is. And bread is essentially ground up grass seeds that have been mixed with water and salt and a few other ingredients to make this delicious thing called bread. Now, where do these grass seeds come from? So, like if you look at this here, they pluck off these seeds, you gotta take off the husk, and then they need to go through a grinding process. So like, kind of like, what does that look like? All right, so we have a field of grass and we let it grow. After a few months, the seeds start to form. And that's when we come in and we cut it. Boom, 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 and then you'll see those like stacks of wheat like this in the field. And this gets processed. They take off the husk and you got, this is what a grain looks like. This is what a grass seed is. Whether it's rice, corn, or quinoa, this is the anatomy of a seed. There is the endosperm, which is where most of the starch is and where the gluten hangs out. And there's gluten in all. There's gluten in all grains. Every single grain has some type of gluten in it, which is literally just protein in storage form. Wheat has a little bit more of an elastic gluten structure, but they all have gluten. Then we have the germ, and this germinates into a baby plant. And then we have the bran, which is arguably the most hardest part to digest of the grass seed because it's like it's a shell. It's supposed to be like its protective barrier. We grow the grass, we harvest it, and it gets milled. And once this gets ground up, they have different processes to remove out all of these different parts. So let's start going down the different types of bread. So right here we have white Wonder Bread. I'm just going to call it Wonder Bread. And then we have like white regular bread. Now this is going to have a lot of additives to it, where this is regular white bread, which you would get at a bakery, is normally just made out of grain, water, and salt, and like maybe a few other things, where this has a bunch of different preservatives and emulsifiers. Like this can stay nice and moist and it won't mold for a very long time. This has a very long shelf life. A lot of crazy science goes into this. And then there's this. This will become hard in days and it will mold very fast. Now, if we want to argue which one's healthier, I would argue this one because it has less, it's easier to digest because there's like less preservatives and less crap in it. But does one of these cause gut disease? Neither of these cause gut disease because gut disease actually stems from a traumatic event that puts our gut into overdrive. And if somebody is reacting a lot to bread, then maybe bread was somehow related to the conflict. Maybe I was eating this sandwich, when something bad happened to me. Maybe, when I was little, my mom made me eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and I didn't want to eat it. Maybe they made me want to eat some sandwich that I didn't want to eat. Bread is in our face 3 times a day in Western culture, so it's very easy for it to be a part of the traumatic event. And especially now, gluten-free is this new like popular health fad, so it's like very easy for the psyche, for our brain to like link this. Like when I was going through my Crohn's journey, I could eat bread and I had 0 symptoms until I started reading these keto, carnivore, grain-free books. And literally just after a month of reading these books, I could not eat this. But then when I learned the basics of German New Medicine, and I really started to look into the real science behind gut disease, it's all caused by stress. And then like literally the next day I was eating bread without issue. So essentially what white bread is this germ has been removed, so like a lot of the vitamin E has been removed, and then the bran has been removed. And this is okay to eat, it's just not as nutrient dense. Now, we could make this easier to digest by putting it through the sourdough process. You will notice when you eat a regular piece of bread versus sourdough bread, like your energy levels, like it won't feel as heavy, like you won't be as tired after you eat it because it requires less energy to digest. Now, if we go to a gluten-free, white gluten-free type of bread, now this is normally going to get made with rice or buckwheat or something like that. If you have a serious gluten allergy, like proceed with caution, but I want you to start to look into your past and think about when you decided you were gluten intolerant. So I have this old book right here. I believe it was written in the 1930s. It was like from a doctor in the 1930s. And there's this page where he's going over all of like the people, all the foods that people like react to. He has like 50 different foods listed here. Not one wheat. Wheat is not listed once. It's because it was such, it's like almost saying like you're allergic to water. How essential wheat was to our culture back then. And a lot of people in the keto community and carnivore community and paleo community, they're going to argue that we haven't been eating grain. And it's total nonsense because if you look at the archaeology, you can see grain grinding stones that are like 60,000 years old, like in Australia. We've been eating grain for a very long time. Think about it, like in the winter, it's very difficult to preserve food before the refrigerator in our modern food systems. These seeds, they can be stored for years and years and years and then used without issue. There's not many foods you can say that about. Grains are really the only foods that you can store at like room temperature for years and then within moments have it ready to cook and eat. There are not, with no refrigerators, no crazy preservatives, this is like really the only easy food that you can do that with. It's on the Ukrainian flag. That bottom stripe stands for fields of golden wheat. America, before the 50s, you would have slept on this, you would have fed your cattle this, you would have baked bread out of this, you would have turned it upside down and turned it into a broom. This would have been your roof. It had so many purposes. Like nobody could even fathom that this could not be good for you. Now the next argument people are going to make is, oh, it's sprayed with pesticides and it's GMO and all this stuff. That's why I can eat grain in Europe, but I can't have it in America. So glyphosate isn't, I know it's used, but it's not as widely used as you would think. They don't use it as much as you think. Like it would be very expensive to spray your whole crop with. It'd be very expensive. It's not cost effective. These farmers are trying to produce wheat as cheap as possible. And then a lot of people have this argument that, oh, it's the GMO wheat, this genetically modified wheat. It's, that's why we can't digest it. GMO wheat does not exist, and it's, they're working on it, but it's not in mass production. Both in the US and in the EU, it is not in production at all whatsoever. They use glyphosate a little bit more in the US than they do in the EU, but they still use it in the EU. So the next type of breads we have are whole grain breads. Now, whole grain breads are going to be more nutrient dense because they have more of the whole seed in it. They have the vitamin E and the phosphorus, the stuff, all the stuff that's in the minerals that's in the bran. But they are harder to digest. If somebody's like going through a flare and they need to eat something, I would put them on white bread instead of whole wheat bread. Even if the whole wheat bread was sourdough, if this was, we had bacteria break this down for a few hours before before we cooked it and made it, I would still give them sourdough white bread over a sourdough whole grain bread, because the grain, like, this just feels heavy on your stomach. Like if you were to eat one slice of this, you would just feel tired because your body is anticipating how much energy it's going to have to use to break this down and digest it. Now you can also have ancient grain wheats. So you have like wheat, and then the ancient grain wheats are things like spelt and kamut. There's a bunch of different strains out there. I don't think it's that much of a deal. You'll hear some books that are like, oh, people who are gluten intolerant, they could eat this grain, but not the regular grain. It's simply based off of your belief. If something comes into you and you believe it to be nourishing, your nervous system won't freak out and try to vomit it up or diarrhea it out. But if you just spent, 10 hours, listening to an ebook or an audiobook about how this special kamut grain, the ancient Egyptians used it as medicine and blah, 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 this, blah, 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 that. And you're like, oh my God, oh wow, I can have this. And you eat it, and, depending on that person's belief system and how much they believe it, determines whether it's going to stay in there or get ejected. I want you to think, you ate bread your whole entire life. Let's say, you ate bread your whole life, and then all of a sudden at the age of 20, that's when your gut issues started. And you ate bread the whole time. And now we're going to blame bread? Okay, let's do that for a second. So you take bread out of your diet, and when you do this, you might feel a little bit better, but the person, is still not in good shape. They're still having a lot of issues. Because what started this person's gut issues when they were 20 is a traumatic event. Maybe they failed school. Maybe they got fired from a job. Maybe they went through a bad breakup. Maybe they got in a fight with their landlord. Maybe they got kicked off the sports team. Maybe they got kicked out of their World of Warcraft guild. This is what we need to look for. Because if you start blaming foods, we literally get down to like, oh, I'm just going to eat meat. And then it's like, oh, well, then I can only eat cow. I can't eat chicken. It gets ridiculous. And in reality, what's causing all your symptoms behind the scenes is this traumatic event and its PTSD triggers. And there's a ton of science to back this up. I have a free webinar in my description. It's essentially a mini version of my 13-day protocol where I show you everything I would do to get better if I had to do it all over again. But like the first step to bringing wheat back into your diet is to find the moment that you decided that you were allergic to it. And find that traumatic event that put your gut into overdrive. When you find that traumatic event, all those beliefs you created, from reading the Grain Brain book and stuff like that, just go out the window. The history of celiac disease is pretty obnoxious. So the word celiac is like Greek for abdominal. And so for thousands and thousands of years, if somebody had celiac disease, it just meant that they had digestive issues. And then it wasn't until the 1950s, I think he was from Denmark. I think his name was William Dickey or something like that. He believed that, taking wheat out of the diet was going to help people get better from their digestive issues. And he did not have a lot of data to back this up, but somehow this idea stuck. And somewhere in the 60s and 70s, the word celiac disease somehow started to mean, you were gluten intolerant. And then in the 1990s and early 2000s, there was this Italian doctor that, invented the term leaky gut and really pushed this gluten intolerance nonsense. Our mind has control over our complete body. I know peas or green beans are a very healthy, nutritious food for me, but I will vomit violently if I have to eat them just simply because I don't like the taste. When I was first doing these strict diets, I was doing these whole grain breads, and I would eat them and just be like, whoa, I have no energy. It's because they're so dense and hard to digest. Now, the best type of bread to eat would be a sprouted whole grain sourdough bread. But that's like finding a leprechaun or like finding a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. That's really tough to find. So what you're better off doing, like the most nutritious thing for you to do, bread is really good at supplying starch, supplying like a slow burn glucose. So it's best if you get like a regular sourdough bread, which is available in a lot of places, and then putting some high quality butter on it. It has a lot of those fat soluble vitamins, and or putting liver pate would be the ultimate. Liver pate would be the ultimate like way to eat bread if you put that on there. So some ingredients you want to look out for. So you'll see some breads that have sugar in it, and that's okay because in order to wake up the yeast, you have to feed them a little bit of sugar. And even to wake up the sourdough starter to get it really going so it can ferment faster, so it can make this easier to digest, you have to give these little guys sugar to get started. So it's okay if there's sugar on the ingredients list. The emulsifiers and the preservatives are going to be in like these Wonder Dough types of breads that have a very long shelf life. They're totally fine to eat. They're not the healthiest things to eat in the world, but you can eat these without issue. These multi-grain breads are going to be the hardest to digest just because they have like unmilled seeds in them. And you'll also see some other like keto breads that have ground up almond flour in it. Almonds is a tree nut. It's a tree seed. And tree seeds are by far the hardest to digest. Usually their recipes require a lot of cooking to break it down and make it taste good and make it edible. All right, if you haven't done so already, I said go watch my free webinar, and I go over in much more detail how to heal your gut and other autoimmune diseases. Let me know in the comments below what other type of videos you'd like to see me make.